All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for today's program as part of our Arizona Histories American Stories program series. I am your host. I am Janie Adams, History Engagement Manager, a staff historian, and associate editor for the Journal of Arizona History. A little bit about the Arizona Historical Society. AHS is a nonprofit educational and cultural institution and a state agency established in 1864. We protect, preserve, and tell the story of Arizona's past through museum exhibitions, libraries and collections, outreach, educational programming, and publishing. AHS preserves our past, shares our state stories, and connects people through the power of Arizona's history. Support for programming like this comes in part from our members. If you love this kind of programming and want to see more of it, consider becoming a member of the Historical Society. Members get free admission to AHS museums, special member-only events, and members-only pricing for programs, print copies of the Journal of Arizona History, and so much more. And to learn about membership and all the things that we do at the Society, there we go. Stay connected with us. Sign up for our email list, follow us on social media, explore one of our museums, and you can learn about all of that by visiting us online at azhs.org. Some helpful reminders for today's session. This is a Zoom webinar, so Dr. Pagán and I cannot hear or see you. We hope that you have your lunch and are enjoying this little bit of a brown bag session. But if questions or comments come up during the course of the presentation, please feel free to send those in using the Q&A feature or the chat box, either way. The next program in our series is in 2 weeks. Note a little bit of a time difference. That one's going to be at 11 a.m., not noon, with Dr. David Berman. And then I believe it's 2 weeks after that is our next program with Lynn Downey on some historical research that she has actually done here at the Historical Society. So that one will be really exciting. All right, and without any further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for today. Dr. Eduardo Pagán is the Bob Stump Endowed Professor of History at ASU in Tempe and the author of Murder at the Sleepy Lagoon, Zoot Suits, Race and Riot in Wartime Los Angeles. He's widely published with prestigious journals like the Pacific Historical Review, the Journal of Social Science History, and of course, the Journal of Arizona History. Dr. Pagán, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that introduction as well. I want to just add another word of introducing myself as well. I'm born and bred in Arizona, born and raised. Proud native Arizonan. I love this state. I love this history as well. And one of my passions as a historian, even though I teach on the American West, is really to illuminate the stories that make Arizona a really unique place. There's so many stories to tell, so many stories you wouldn't believe that have yet to be told, that I just find a lot of fun in doing research and also writing as well. So what I'd like to do today is I want to tell you a little bit about a book that should have been out by now. And hopefully we'll be on in a couple of months. I just received late word that there was a problem with the printer, not the publisher, but the printer. And this book was originally scheduled to be out already, and it's not. But I'm hearing now that it might be in April. So fingers crossed. It is forthcoming. It's already gone through all the stages of publication, so it will come out. And so the title of today's presentation, as with the book, is Tumbleweed Underworld, the Saga of Morphine and Mayhem in the Arizona Territory. So let's do this. Let me take you back, probably about 8 years ago. And I was doing the closing research on my book on the Pleasant Valley War, called Valley of the Guns, the Pleasant Valley War, and the Trauma of Violence. And what I was doing was I was really just trying to follow through the storylines of the different people that were involved in the Pleasant Valley War that I had written about. And so I was sitting in the Polly Rosenbaum Center or room in downtown Phoenix, where the state archives are. And I'm going through following one of them that was sent to the Arizona Historical, I'm sorry, the Arizona Yuma Territorial Prison. And I came across this photograph right here, this very photograph. And it's one of those moments where I was stopped in my research tracks. And I'll tell you why. A couple of things. I want you to just take a moment and just kind of analyze this image that you see in front of her. Now the picture itself is really much smaller. It's blown up for this presentation and also for research purposes. But I just want you to note a couple things. One of the most obvious ones, I think, is if you just take a look at her blouse, for example, look at the ruffle around the neck and also going all the way down her bodice, the pleating in her shoulders, right? And as you kind of look closer, you see pleating elsewhere in her blouse. And the reason why I'm pointing this out is that what she was wearing on this very day that she was entered into the Yuma Territorial Prison, and this photograph was taken, this was not the attire of a common woman, of a working class woman, of a washerwoman, for example, or any other skills that were necessary in the territorial prison. This is a woman who had known comfort, right? This is what her clothing is telling me, right? Now, let's go on just a little bit. One of the reasons why I was stopped in my tracks is that, as I was turning the pages to the register to the Yuma Territorial Prison, these are the kinds of pictures that I was used to seeing. Hardened men, criminals. The Yuma Territorial Prison was built for the worst kind of men in the Arizona Territory: arsonists, rapists, murderers. The list went on, right? And so it was very common for me to see pictures of prisoners glaring at the camera, looking very much like you would think criminals would look like. And then I saw this picture of this young woman who was wildly out of place. First of all, the prison was built for men. They never anticipated that they would need to house women. So the fact that there was a woman there was already unusual. On top of that, there are a couple of things that really kind of stood out to me, that really honestly spoke to me in my heart and my soul as I looked at this woman, just surprised that she was there to begin with. The more I looked at this picture, the more it began to speak to me about where she was, what her state of mind was, her state of heart was on that very day when she sat down in that chair to have this photograph taken. And I'll just walk you through a little bit of what spoke to me. Now, granted, this is interpretive of black and white, grainy black and white as well, but this is really what kind of drew me in. So let's begin with is her eyes. What really caught my attention is she had that faraway look that you often hear about for people who have been in traumatic encounters, combat situations, for example. I'm not suggesting that she was, but people who have really been traumatized. That's really what I'm getting across. She had that 1,000-yard stare in her eyes. At least that's what I was interpreting, right? That there's a sense that she could not believe where she was at that very moment, where life had taken her. Just shock. I mean, this is what I'm reading from these eyes to begin with. So she's looking off into the distance. She's certainly not looking into the camera like the other images that I shared with you. And she doesn't look hardened at all. She looks, again, like a woman who had a comfortable life. And she was pretty on top of that. And the closer that I looked, I want you to, okay, you'll probably draw to her eyes as well. And what looks like shadowy makeup was not makeup. I'm pretty confident about that. Mascara really wasn't invented for the masses until the 1920s. This picture was taken in 1894. And so that's not kind of smoky eyes that we might talk about today with an eyeliner and mascara. This is what I'm seeing here is inflammation from crying, right? And notice under her eyes, you start to see bags, right? Under her eyes. The nose as well. The reason why the nose is dark, I think, again, this is my interpretation, she'd been crying a lot, as you can imagine. She had gone through the entire process of being arrested, being put on trial, being convicted, and then transported all the way down to the prison. And now you're sitting in that chair about to be assigned to your cell, you can imagine at least what I'm seeing and how I was interpreting this image was she had been crying her eyes out. And again, this is not the kind of response that I would have expected from a hardened criminal. Now, there have been other women who were jailed in the Yuma Territorial Prison before her and after her as well. And their pictures, which I probably should have shared with you, their pictures are the kind of pictures that you would expect. They look hardened, they look angry, they look, certainly upset, but not in this way, in the way that it spoke to me. A couple other things I want to point out. You might look at her hair. I go back and forth as to whether her hair was cut off short, which was very uncharacteristic of the period, or whether it's simply pulled back into a ponytail. I think it's the latter, but I've been, I can't see beyond the shadows here. I've used all sorts of methods to try and peer beyond the shadows. I don't know. I think it is. I think her hair is pulled back. I think what you're seeing on her left shoulder is a bit of a bow, but I'm not exactly sure. The other thing I want to point out is if you look at her temples, see the lighter areas as well. So for those of you who are familiar with dyed hair, that is an identifying feature that the dye is beginning to wear out. So to begin with, the color of her hair, there's no light reflected in it. It's very typical of hair dyes of the period, that just flat colors. The dyes that we have now, the hair dyes, reflect natural light better. So her hair is dyed. Her natural color is coming through. I don't think they're gray roots, actually. I think her natural color was a kind of dark blonde color. So clearly, this is a bit of a disguise. Her hair is dyed an unnatural color. She wasn't expecting this outcome in her life. Let's see, what else do I want to say about her hair? Oh, I do. It's not her hair so much, but if you just look down at her cheek, would be her right, to the right of the screen, her left cheek. That smudge there was actually just a thumb smudge from the photographer after he developed this photograph. So that's why there's that kind of blemish right there. It's just a fingerprint smudge. Last thing I want to say is that she has a scar right underneath her nose on her upper lip. But that in itself is not distinctive, but it helped me identify who she was later on. And I'll walk you through that as well. So that pictures, I was sitting there in the archives just looking at this image, and it just spoke to me. I've been through hard times myself. I've experienced trauma myself. I think I've experienced that very look when you are in a place in your life that you never expected, and you're wondering, how did I get here and how do I get out, right? That is what I saw when I turned the page and looked at this image and asked myself, who is this woman? What is she doing here? So that's what got me started on this story. I never intended to write a biography about her or about women in the territory. I had other plans. But, what sometimes happens is that there is a storyline. There's a character that just gets inside you and it won't let go. It's not quite as dramatic as feeling called to write the story. But the more I looked into her story, the more I just tried to satisfy that simple question. Who is she? What is she doing here or there, right, in the prison? The more, as I begin to unpeel this onion of her story, the more I realized that there was a story that has not been told enough about the Old West. And so I want to start as a kind of framing device. And again, as I went through her story, she reminded me a lot of the story of Persephone from ancient Greek mythology. If you're not familiar with this story, I'll just tell you very, very quickly that, the story of Persephone was that she was a young maiden minding her own business one day, and Hades, who was the ruler of the underworld, saw her, was enchanted by her beauty, and grabbed her and took her. So this is a kidnapping. In fact, some interpretations of that ancient Greek myth was that she was raped in the process, and he held her prisoner in the underworld and would not let her return. And as part of prisoner, tried to get her to stay. I mean, she had to be willing to stay. And again, I don't know all the nuances of Greek mythology about why she couldn't just return. But nonetheless, as the story goes, he fed her nothing, and she was very, very hungry. But he left, Hades now, left a pomegranate seed in this where she was at in the underworld. And as the Greek story goes, the Fates, the Mores, had decided that for every pomegranate seed that she had eaten, she had to stay in the underworld for 1 month. Make a long story very short. Her mother was also a goddess. There was a big council that was held, and finally Hades was consented to let her return home to her mother. But she had to then, after spending 6 months of the year with her mother, she had to return back to the underworld as his bride. So she's known as the goddess of two names. And the reason why this story, just as a framing device, kind of stuck with me is that this cycle that is implied in this story of Persephone, of someone who had to go to the underworld and then come back to the world of the living, and go back to the underworld, come back to the world of the living. I kept thinking about that as I was studying Georgie's life. Georgie was an addict. She was addicted just about everything there was to be addicted to. And she went through many moments in her life where she tried to get clean, but she couldn't. And there were reasons why she couldn't. People absolutely manipulated her, absolutely used her as well. And so that cycle of trying to break free, trying to get clean, but going back into addiction just reminded me of this story. And so I characterize her in the book as the Persephone of the underworld. I'm sorry, Persephone of the tumbleweeds. Because Georgie's story, the girl that I just introduced to you a moment ago in the black and white picture, Georgie Clifford, reminded me of that, of a young woman struggling to get clear of this journey into the underworld and coming out, but being pulled back in from time and time again. So this book, that's a very quick introduction to who this woman was and her life story. And in order to tell her life story, I realized that I had to really tell three interweaving narratives, and they are the rise of the global opiate market. So, as I'll go into a little more detail in just a moment, opiates were synthesized in the early 1840s. Now, opiates are different than opioids. Opioids are a later generation of opiates, and I'll explain that as well. But just hang with me for a moment. Opiates were synthesized in the 1840s, and then from there became a global drug that was used for every conceivable pain. And I kid you not, every conceivable pain. This is also a period in certainly American history, but also global history, of completely unregulated medicines, entirely, completely. There was zero regulations on opiates. So as the story goes on, again, I'll go into a little bit more detail in just a moment. Morphine was synthesized from opium. Opium's been around. It's a plant that grows. And from the sap of the opium poppy, Frederick Turner synthesized morphine. And from morphine, then heroin was synthesized. Believe it or not, when heroin was first synthesized, it was sold as a cure for addiction to morphine. And as it turns out, that heroin was, of course, 2.5 times more addictive than morphine was, but nonetheless. This is the world that existed in the 1840s all the way until the 1920s, of powerfully addictive drugs sold over the counter with not an ounce of restriction whatsoever. Nobody would blink an eye if you went up to your druggist and said, I'd like to have a nickel's worth of heroin, please. I'd like to buy that bottle of heroin. Nobody would blink an eye. I would like to have some cocaine-infused cigarettes, please, or cocaine-infused cough syrup medicine. Nobody would blink an eye. So I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but so this is one strand of the story, was this rise of the global opiate market. It's a nasty story, as you can imagine. Involves the United Kingdom, which, and I mean this in all seriousness, was the first international drug cartel in the world. It really was. And again, no exaggeration in my characterizing the United Kingdom as such. So you've got the rise of this global opiate market. And then once that's released to US markets after the Civil War, certainly morphine was used during the Civil War, but after the Civil War, it became a commonly used substance. You have this skyrocketing market in opioids. So it includes morphine, opium, and heroin. And I would throw in there cocaine as well. Now, cocaine is not an opioid. It doesn't derive from opium, but nonetheless, it actually comes from South America, from the coca leaf. But nonetheless, it's all part of this pharmaceutical reality that existed of powerfully addictive substances that were completely unregulated and widely used, more than you know, more than I knew. In fact, I like to characterize it as is that opioids were used as common and as frequently as we use ibuprofen and acetaminophen. And that is no exaggeration. That is exactly the case. Every conceivable ache and pain use cocaine, use morphine, use heroin as well. So that's a skyrocketing consumption. That's a second narrative. The third narrative was the struggles with addiction. And I'll just ask this question, it's a rhetorical question. In an era of entirely unregulated, powerfully addictive substances, do you think addiction was a problem? Now, I do try and separate between use and users versus addicts. You can use and not necessarily become addicted, but addiction doesn't come unless usage starts, right? And so there is a slide, there is a downhill slide to it. But there were people who used these addictive substances but never became addicts, and there were a lot of people that became addicts in ways that we don't fully understand, I think, when it comes to the historical record, or certainly in the ways that we talk about the American West. Addicts were also manipulated by other industries. I'll get into that in just a moment, but this is all part of this larger network, these three different narrative strands that I seek to tell with this story. So let me go on. So to begin with, and this is probably should be the fourth narrative strand, but I'm certainly aware of this as a historian of the Old West, that you have to first unpeel this layer of mythology that we all have in our heads. You can't help it. All of us who grew up in the age of watching the classic Westerns, the John Waynes, the Clint Eastwoods, and even now the Kevin Costners, right? The kind of these classic narrative stories about the West. Let me just say this as a historian, all of the movies and television shows, which I love, by the way, I grew up watching Bonanza and High Chaparral and all the rest, right? I mean, we could have a conversation about my favorite Westerns. I like Westerns, but you have to understand, as a genre of literature and in entertainment, Westerns that we've grown up with are not documentaries. They were not reflections of the real Old West. They are stories that have developed their own ways of talking about this mythological Old West. And so let me just show this with you for you for just a moment. This slide that often if we think about the Old West, we think about cowboys, gunfights, and whiskeys, long overcoats, earthen colors, leathers, denim, all these kinds of things, violence, right? The Old West is really quite different, as you can imagine. So here's one of the stock images of the Old West, right? Classic saloon scene, male only environment, or largely male environment as well. Men would gather and, of course, entertain themselves with all kinds of things as well. Here's another kind of stock image as we think about the Old West. And I want to draw your attention more to the women who are at the bar. And these are usually the honky-tonk women, the saloon girls that are there, that are often in so many of these Westerns kind of like the furniture. They're just there, right? And to my knowledge, there is no movie. Maybe there's one, but I can't think of one at the moment. But maybe there's no movie, there's certainly no television show that really probes the question, why are they there? Why are they there? What is their role? Is there nothing else that they could do? No other form of employment? Why are these women there, right? We'll get into that in just a moment, right? Here's another one I want to share with you real quickly. Is that this another image from the classic days of the Old West, right? And so we kind of have these views of how they dressed, and the gambler in the middle with the black, and the buckskin clothing, and so on. You've all seen this, right? We've all grown up with that. Here's another stock image of the West that I'm trying to peel away for you, because we have these ideas in our heads. I certainly have. And this is really the snake oil salesman, right? The traveling salesman, always with a top hat, some black formal clothing, who then opens up his wagon and sells snake oil, right? I mean, products that are supposed to cure whatever ails you, and it's really not. It's deceptive, right? So that's another stock image that we have. Here's another stock image to come back to for a moment of the saloon girl. This is Marilyn Monroe in a Western, as you can see here. And my point is, this is all wrong. All of it. All of it. It is not historical. Yes, there were saloon girls. That is true. They didn't look like her. They didn't even look close to her. They didn't even dress like her. I mean, the list goes on, but we have this image in our mind that, what does a saloon girl look like, right? And I just want to say she's way too skinny, way too pretty, and the clothing is just all wrong. All wrong. They didn't dress this way back in the old days. So with that, let me just start kind of like, I've peeled off the layers very quickly of this onion of these ideas that we have in our head, certainly part of American popular culture. And I want to say this as we begin to put things back in and try and pull you into the Old West as it was. The Old West was a period in time that was synonymous with the Victorian era, right? The Victorian era, which we typically think of as very prim and proper, ruled by all kinds of etiquette, the way that gentlemen are supposed to behave, the way that women are supposed to behave as well. And that's very much true. In fact, again, drawing from popular media as a way of just trying to understand the Old West in terms of dress, the way that they dressed, not with leather and vests and all these kinds of things, had much more in common with Hello Dolly, which was also set in the 1890s, granted in Yonkers, New York City as well. But certainly the Old West as it existed had much more in common with life on the East and the way that they dressed than the ways that we think about them now, again, with the leather vest and, the John Wayne hat and all those kinds of things like that. Here's an image that I want to share with you. This is from Arizona. This is a historic image, the Tombstone Epitaph. You can see all these men gathered together as this photograph is taken. I want to ask you, as you look at this photograph, taken from the 19th century, the end of the 19th century, so I'd put it 1890s, who's dressed like a cowboy? The way that we think of cowboys, right? With the long duster and the cowboy hat and all this. Who do you see here? It says Tombstone, right? A quintessential Western town. Who's dressed in like a cowboy that we might recognize? Nobody. It just, in the interest of time, nobody. And I want you to note that so many of them are wearing suits, often three-piece suits. The hats that they're wearing are not cowboy hats as we think about cowboy hats today. They dressed in clothing that was supplied to them by clothiers in Chicago, in Philadelphia, New York City as well. There was no country Western store that you could go to and trade in your Eastern duds for Western duds. Didn't exist. Didn't exist. They were part of a national market that was defined in many ways, aesthetically speaking, by the Victorian era, right? And you see that reflected here. Here's another image I want to share with you very, very quickly. Bowler hats, very, very common. Again, who's dressed as a cowboy? Again, as a Hollywood cowboy? Certainly not like Roy Rogers, right? Here's another one. Here's some different images of women of the West. You might recognize Olive Oatman to the right. This is how women of the West dressed. They were covered from neck to feet, right? Completely covered. It's one of the reasons why I said that the saloon girls of the Old West, and I do have pictures I'll show to you in just a moment, they never bared their shoulders ever. They never dressed in these tight bodices. That's an invention of Hollywood as well. This is another image of, now this is a little bit more in the Midwest because we don't have sod houses here in Arizona. But my point is, I want you to look at their clothing, is even though these are women living out on the frontier, living out in what was then the West, part of the West as well, look at how they're dressed, covered from neck all the way down to their feet, in cloth that they purchased at the local store. Certainly not wearing jeans, certainly not wearing leather pants, all the kinds of things that we like to see in our Westerns today. This is how they dressed. Here's another one. I love this image. So you'll recognize this. I think this is a mule deer that has been killed, 10-point buck. It's the woman who killed this deer that I want you to focus in on. Look at the way she's dressed. Clearly, she's out hunting. She's most likely out trying to feed her family. And she did very well. As you can see, the knife in her hand, she's about to gut this deer so she can harvest it. Notice the way she's dressed. Again, she's out in the field. She's out in the rough. Look at the sagebrush behind her. This is the way she's dressed. This is how women in the Old West dressed, covered from neck all the way down through their feet as well, and wearing very nice cloth as well. Now, that's kind of pulling you back into the world of the 1880s, 1890s, Old West. Let's take a moment. I want to go over to the global market, as I'd introduced before, kind of the underlying story behind this woman that I found in the prison, right? This is an illustration of Friedrich Suterner, who was living in Germany, and he was a self-taught chemist. And he actually was an insomniac, and he was trying to find the cure for insomnia. I'm just noticing the time, we're probably going a little bit long. I was telling Janie earlier, it's always a hazard that when you give an open mic to a professor, because we've been trained to lecture in 2-hour format. So I will try and keep this very short. I apologize. Happy to answer more questions during the Q&A, but I want to see if I can wrap this up real quickly. Friedrich Sojourner, so he synthesizes morphine, named after Morpheus, the god of dreams, if I remember correctly, and accidentally finds a very, very powerful painkiller. Now, morphine, as it was synthesized in liquid format and consumed orally, the body, the liver in particular, filters out a lot of the effects that morphine has. So morphine as a liquid substance is not as effective as morphine that is injected straight into the brain, because it bypasses the liver, which then filters out a lot of the substances that morphine has to offer, and goes straight to your brain. Now, what's happening at the time when Turner synthesizes morphine, and it becomes a pharmaceutical product then that is sold globally. As a matter of fact, you may have heard of Merck, international pharmacist today. Merck was actually an apothecary in Germany at the same time that began to sell morphine in all kinds of forms, pill form, liquid form, and so on. And this was the beginning of Merck as this global entity. But I want to share this with you. This is a picture of a Sears and Roebuck catalog. Now, if you've ever looked at historic Sears and Roebuck catalogs, you know you could buy virtually anything. Houses, saddles, the list goes on and on. This is a picture for $2 that you could buy a hypodermic syringe. So widely available syringes, kind of the syringes go back a very, very long ways, but the mass marketing of syringes coincides with the mass marketing of morphine and later with heroin as well. So now, not only do you have this powerful painkiller and addictive substance, you have a means by which it is as powerful as it possibly can be. Right here, for $2, you can have this hypodermic syringe. Now, let me also say the other thing as well. This is also the age of patent medicines. This gave rise, the synthesizing of morphine gave rise to patent medicines. Patent medicines, if we went back to the 1870s and 1880s, were no different than medicines today. Now, today, as 2026, as we talk about medicines, think about prescription medicines that are handled in highly prescriptive ways by druggists, by chemists, by doctors, and controlled as much as possible. If we went back in time, there would be no difference between a vial of morphine and Winslow's soothing syrup, right? What's interesting to me is actually we still have patent medicines that we use today that actually came from this period. Vicks Vapor Rub, for example. Now, it didn't have opiates, but I'm just saying there are, I'm just saying that there are other kinds of things that we still use to this day that are not prescribed medicines. And you can go to your local CVS or Walgreens and find them on the counters that are descendants of this period. But so many patent medicines during the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s contained opiates. That's where I'm going. This Winslow soothing syrup for children. Yeah. The dominant ingredient in so many of these were morphine or heroin or sometimes cocaine. Here's an example. This is Allen's cocaine tablets for what? For your sore throat. If you're sleepless, take cocaine. I know that's like it. This is marketing in its most primitive way. Anything to get this thing into your hands so you can start using it, right? So sleepless, it will cure nervousness. I know it's laughable. Headaches. This is, again, you could buy this over the counter. In fact, let's look at that price. Yeah, 50 cents a box for cocaine tablets. This is cocaine toothache drops for children. Notice the picture there. Teething babies. There are cocaine tooth drops that you can rub on their gums, and their gums become numb from teething. My point is that in the post-Civil War period, unregulated pharmaceuticals and patent medicines introduced generations of people to powerfully addictive substances, starting with birth, right? If you've ever been around children who are teething, they cry a lot and they are miserable for good reason. Their teeth are cutting through their gums. So if you went back to the 1880s, you would just rub the cocaine syrup on their gums, and right away, these children are then introduced to cocaine, right? This is Coca-Cola. I'm sure you all know the story of the invention of Coca-Cola from Pemberton, who was a chemist in Georgia. He himself was a morphine addict as well, and he was trying to find something to wean off of morphine. And so he invented Coca-Cola. The Coca refers to the cocaine that was originally in Coca-Cola, and the cola refers to the caffeine that is in Coca-Cola today. It's still in. So imagine the original recipe for Coca-Cola had cocaine and caffeine. That might cure you of your morphine addiction. Now, here's a picture of heroin over the counter. Notice the seller, the manufacturer of it, Bayer, right? Bayer is also a German apothecary, or was a German apothecary, that turned into this global marketer of heroin. So you could go to your local drugstore or pay for it through the post and get your dollar's worth of heroin pills. And this is also the end of it. I'll just show with you. This is cannabis, marijuana, also available during this period as well. Now, so what I've tried to do is I've tried to share with you, first of all, very quickly, this global story, the invention of opioids suddenly become this global market. In addition to the invention of the syringe and the widespread availability of the syringe, which then made these substances far more powerful than they would have been in any other form that was taken orally. And now we come down to the Arizona Territory, right? What makes the territory this unique site to understand this epidemic that existed and this market that existed as well? I want to just point out a couple things. This is a map of present-day Arizona, and I want you to notice the blue lines, the rivers, right? So you'll see on the south of it, the San Pedro that's running down through the Chihuahuan Desert, the Gila River, of course, and you'll see the Salt River as well. Up north, the Little Colorado coming off the Colorado River. Here's why I want you to notice this to begin with. You know this very well. If it's not in your conscious thought, you can't last very long in the desert without water, without access to water. So all of our settlements in Arizona were around water. As a matter of fact, all of the native settlements were around water, dependable water. Now, what that means, and the reason I'm sharing this with you, is if you'll notice the distance between, say, for example, the Gila and the Little Colorado, or the San Pedro, or even the Salt River, these are large distances. So people living along the Salt River and people living along the Gila or down the San Pedro as well, they lived a fair amount of distance from each other. This becomes a factor in Arizona. Distance becomes very, very critical when it comes to the medical profession. The medical profession, if you were a physician, let's just say in Phoenix, it would take you likely a day. I'm trying to do the math real quickly, probably a 4 to 6 hour ride out to Wickenburg, which today you can get there in under an hour, right? I mean, so your range, as your reach as a physician is very limited by transportation. Horses walk at about 4 miles an hour. And so if you just kind of do the math, A day's ride would only get you probably about 20 miles. Again, I have to go back and do the math. Maybe a little bit farther, but you understand my point. It's not like hopping in a car and just driving up to Page for the day, right? That's a several day journey. So the doctors were most concentrated in the urban or the concentrated settlements in Arizona. And as we're talking about the territorial period, which I'll take it all the way up to statehood in the early 20th century, the major, I don't want to call them metropolitan areas, but the major areas of habitation were Prescott, Phoenix, and Tucson. So if you're settling, for example, out in Coconino County or Navajo County or Apache County or Graham County, your access to healthcare is very, very limited, trained healthcare, right? So you have to self-medicate, which is very easy to do. And drugs were widespread for that reason. They were widespread because they would kill pain. Now, let me get to Clifton. I'm afraid I'm getting on a little bit too long. Let me get down to Clifton. I want to share that with you. I apologize. I was going to make a little mark where Clifton is. If you're in the Salt River Valley where I'm at, you see the blue dot where Phoenix is. If you just go out to the right and you'll see the San Carlos Reservation, that red dot, and I meant to make it bigger, is Clifton. It's mining town or mining country. It still is to this day. If you go back to Clifton, this was the reality in the 1880s and 1890s. And this is where we first meet Georgie and her story. Her family comes out to Clifton from originally from Pennsylvania. They come out to Clifton. This is pretty much what they find. Clifton is this accumulation of tents and a few adobe homes as well, mining copper. As a matter of fact, this photograph may be a photograph of where the actual doctor who first prescribed morphine to Georgie, that may have been his actual office as well, right? So before Georgie Clifford, the woman in that photograph, before she was Georgie Clifford, her name was Minnie Mae Eichler, and her family was the Eichler family. She was born in 1871, and they arrived in Clifton in 1882. This is an actual photograph of Minnie Mae. By my estimation, there's no information on the back of the photograph, but by estimation, I put her at about 11 years old, maybe 10 years old, just judging by her body proportions. So what happens in Clifton in 1885, remember she arrives in 1882. So about 3 years after that photograph, her family falls apart. Her father leaves. Her mother loved a good time, we'll put it that way. She loved to spend her time in grog houses and beer gardens that were in Clifton, and there were many, in saloons. She loved men. That's very clear. She would bring them home often to their tent. One of her boyfriends raped Minnie twice, as far as we know. She was 12 years old. One of her boyfriends raped Minnie. Minnie, later on, that boyfriend was brought up on charges of rape, and Minnie had to testify twice in court and had to answer very, very intimate questions about what happened, why, were you involved? I mean, were you an active participant? All those kinds of questions. One of the things that came out during this period, and again, I realize I'm going a bit long, was during the trial, the defense tried to argue that it wasn't rape because everybody knew that Minnie's mother was a loose woman. And you can't rape a loose woman. This is the argument that they were making, right? Now, they didn't succeed with that argument. But the defense and the prosecution all revolved around this question about, was Minnie chaste or was she not? And she had to answer these questions, very explicit questions. So I just want you to put yourself in the mindset of a young woman who's been violated now. And you're in a room full of men, and you are having to answer very intimate questions about your anatomy, about what happened on that day, what you experienced. Just imagine that kind of violation that happens again, not physically, but emotionally as well. This is what she was subjected to. In the interest of time, I'll just go forward and just say that I have evidence to believe that because of the trauma that she was subjected to, she had contracted gonorrhea, by the way, as a result of this rape. trying to treat gonorrhea, trying to treat the trauma of rape, trying to treat the trauma of a 12-year-old girl being grilled by a room full of men. She was treated to morphine, regular shots of morphine. As a matter of fact, let me just read you a quotation, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. There's so much more I could tell you. I'm going to try and wrap this up as quickly as I can because this story gets pretty deep into this. But this is a passage of 1892, a medical journal, and I want you to just read this. And I realize on my little screen there's blocking some of it, but I'll read this apart, not the whole thing. But it says that the general practitioner or the specialist are directly responsible in instances for the continuous use of morphine and the means of relieving the treatment of gynecological cases for women in particular. The general practitioner frequently meets with cases of ill-defined pelvic pains. This is what they would call women's problems back then. Cases of intestinal colic or cases of distinct ovarian pains, and even these seem, without question, to his mind, to call for morphine. This he administers repeatedly in the acute attacks, often by hypodermic injections. I'll just pause here and I'll just tell you, it was a common part of the medical practice in the 1880s and 1890s that for any kind of women's issues, as it was collectively called, which included painful menstrual cramps for young women, morphine shots were the treatment. So again, imagine this scenario. You're growing up in the post-Civil War period as a child. You're introduced to cocaine as a baby. Any kind of ache or pain, any kind of patent medicine, you have hay fever that contains cocaine, you are already introduced to. And now as a young woman, put aside the trauma for just a moment, just as a young woman experiencing menstrual pain, goes to the local doctor and gets her shots, her daily shots of morphine once a month. What I'm suggesting is that this paints a picture of addiction that was very, very common. As a matter of fact, David Cartwright, who wrote this book called Dark Paradise, fantastic book, did a study of addiction of the 19th century. So if you can imagine a pie chart, the largest slice of the pie chart were actually women, white women, who had regular access to medical care. Why? Because morphine was overprescribed for any kind of ache or pain. The second largest slice of that pie were doctors who self-administered, right? So this is the scenario now that Georgie was playing with. And what she didn't know, and what so many people didn't know, is that with every shot of morphine, it was like another seed of Persephone eating, because she was hungry. She was just simply trying to feed herself. But it drew many more and more and more into the underworld of addiction. And so that's part of the unseen price of using these powerful drugs in a completely unregulated period. What happens is that Minnie's mother convinces her to go into prostitution. And she goes up to Prescott, and she becomes a high-class call girl in the most elite gentlemen's club that was in Prescott. Prescott at the time was the territorial capital. And what was very common for prostitutes, now going on to this theme about usage, right? Prostitutes regularly used morphine because it could blunt or stall ovulation. It was an early means of trying to avoid getting pregnant. On top of that, morphine was a way of just blunting the trauma of strangers using your body as they wanted, right? And as if you wanted to get paid, you couldn't say no, right? So morphine was a very regular part of the sex industry in the territory and across the country. I just want to show you very quickly, this is a historic image of Montezuma Street in Prescott. Again, Prescott was the territorial capital. That's what I want you to understand. This is a map going back to the 1880s, 1890s. And if you're familiar with downtown Prescott, you'll see Granite Street, Montezuma on the right of your screen. This is what is now called Whiskey Row. This area right here, this is what we're talking about. If you go to Prescott today, in the center is the courthouse. To the left of it is Whiskey Row, and there are all these historic saloons that are there. Go to the next street over to the left, that's Granite Street. Now, the homes that existed at Granite Street are no longer there, but this is the area we're talking about. This was the red light district, right here, right behind the saloons, right next to the courthouse, to show you just how common all of this was, right? This is what is now called Whiskey Row because of all the saloons there. She goes there. And also on Whiskey Row, you could find opium dens, and houses of prostitution didn't just serve up sex. They also served up, as a gentleman's club, the finest wines, the finest liquor, opioids, whatever you needed to keep you there at the business, they serve. So again, brothels were not just there for sex. They were there for anything that the gentleman wanted, anything, right? So this is not a picture from the brothel. None exists that I could ever find. This is a picture, believe it or not. You see that gentleman who's balding and he's leaning over? That's actually Sigmund Freud with his patients. They're trying out opium to see how it does with their psychological issues. But the picture that I want to paint for you, though, is if you went to an opium den in the 1890s in Prescott on Granite Street, you would likely see this. You would likely see a lot of consumers lying about, stoned out of their minds. This often happened also in houses of prostitution as well. Interesting question is, was this trafficking? In the interest of time, I'm not going to read this for you because I realize I'm going much longer. I characterize this as trafficking because addiction was absolutely used as a way of controlling women who were in the sex trade. Again, you remember that they used morphine to regulate ovulation, to numb the injustices of violation that happened on a regular basis. Who became their suppliers? It's the madams of the house. That became their suppliers. So I'll have to skip ahead, and I certainly apologize for this, of having to skim through this. I just went on too long. But the murder, the death that resulted in Georgie's being sent to the prison happened right here in 1894. Peter Perry. Peter Perry was a Frenchman. He was a railroad brakeman. He was administered a fatal dose of morphine while he was in the bedroom that was used by Georgie Clifford. She was indicted for murder. She always insisted that she was innocent. There was another woman who was using the room. Trial went on in Flagstaff as well. This is an actual passage in one of the territorial newspapers where you can see that she was convicted of manslaughter, and this is how she wound up in the prison. I'll say this as well. This is a picture of the Arizona or the Yuma Territorial Prison. This is where all of these things come together. The global opium trade and the national patent medicine industry, how it played out. And this is the story I tried to explain. How did it play out in the everyday lives of people in the Arizona Territory? And so Georgie became my guide into this underworld. This was an era of the first opioid epidemic. And my point is that once the genie was uncorked to opioids, to powerfully addictive substances in the post-Civil War period, it never went back in. Even though the United States began to regulate opioids starting with 1920s, we've been living with an opioid epidemic since it was first introduced. So picture to your left is an advertisement for morphine. Again, you can buy it in pill form. Picture to your right is a story about pharmaceutical companies today that are serving up opioids by overprescription, right? Same phenomenon at work today, right? So here's a question. Does Georgie, as my Persephone of the underworld, of the tumbleweeds, does she ever get clean? Does she ever escape? Does she ever return to the world of the living? And I will not answer that question because you have to buy the book, right? So I want to tease this a little bit. But that's the question that I really try to pursue as well. What happened to her? Does she ever get clean? There's so many people around her died of overdose. The list is just remarkable. So let me wrap up with this. Why does the story matter? It ties together the rise of the global opiate market. It talks about the use, overuse, the misuse of opiates and addiction as well. And it also pulls together the exploitative markets that existed. It wasn't just the market in opioids, but the consumers who did not understand fully what caffeine-infused cough drops would do because you have hay fever or something, a sore throat. They didn't fully understand. And do you think then there was the chance for misuse? Absolutely. So patent medicines, that whole industry as well, preyed upon people's ignorance of these substances. Sex work industry was intimately connected with dependence on drugs. And so even in going back to what I said before, and I'll try and wrap up on this point in the interest of time, the saloon girl that I talked about before, In our Westerns, we never contemplate why she was there. I'll tell you why she was there. She was a sex worker. And many of them were held there by the saloon keeper who kept them supplied with drugs so that they could turn tricks for customers in the saloon. So we never really explore that, but people were exploited as a result of these addictions. And even the addiction cure industry. Oh my gosh, maybe we can answer this in the interest of Q&A, but part of what I tried to do in telling this story was not an expose, but really a story of compassion, of people innocently pulled into these situations, of Georgie herself, Minnie, who was innocently pulled into this world of sex work and drug addiction as well. It's a nasty story. It's an ugly story. It's a sad story as well, but hopefully it's one that's told with compassion, and with a lens that will help us understand what happened then and what's happening now. So I will stop there in the interest of time. Janie, so again, I apologize. I went on long.
No need to apologize. Oh my gosh, no.
If there are any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them.
Yeah, I mean, we got a couple in here. I'll just say before we launch into some questions that compassion piece is so important. I think a lot of historians, we kind of forget that these are people, and
right.
People are historical people are as complicated as we are, and are faced with decisions that, if we were in their shoes, what kind of decision, like that compassion piece is so important, and sometimes really missing, especially in these kind of like scintillating, titillating kind of true crime stories. And then another piece that I think is particularly interesting is that kind of mythology of the Wild West. People always ask about these things, and I always say the Wild West is a lot more complicated than it is in the movies. And I think that Georgie's story really kind of sheds a light on women in the Wild West, and the kind of confluence of ideas between East and West, and a global, I, like you were saying, I don't want to say these people were cosmopolitan by any means, but they're connected to a global society.
They are intimately connected to global markets. Absolutely.
So one of the questions, and you kind of teased it a little bit, is, people are always really surprised to know that, of course, women are some of the represent some of the largest groups of addicts during this time period, but also doctors who are self-prescribing. This question is specifically about dentistry, which I think the history of dentistry is so interesting, and something we take for granted. I mean, dental issues killed people for a really long time.
Yeah. So I didn't look so much in the dental industry because it didn't factor in with her story. I looked more into the medical industry because it was very much a story. How did she get regular access as a young woman to morphine? And it was really through her doctor, who had been trained in Europe, and he had served for many years. He was a well-respected doctor, but it was normal back then. So I didn't look at dentistry. It wouldn't surprise me to see that it was used at all. We often think about whiskey, right, when it comes to the Old West, but we never think that these powerful opioids were used as well. I suspect they were, but I can't answer that directly because I just haven't looked into that industry in particular.
Yeah. If you've had a really bad cavity, how horrible the pain can be.
Yes.
And then another question, of course, everyone is chomping at the bit. Where do we get your book? I think I saw, I think I was looking on the University of Oklahoma Press website. Yeah. And my understanding is that the ebook is available now, and the print book, the print book maybe early April.
Right, exactly. And also Barnes and Noble and Amazon, you can order it through there. Again, I'm sad to say that it won't be until, if you want to pay, I think it's only in hardback, won't be available until April. But I'm very pleased, and it makes sense that the ebook is available. So certainly that way.
Well, and my last kind of question to tie this all together, for folks who are interested in pursuing stories like these, uncovering the lives of everyday people, what is your advice?
My advice, and this is what I find a lot of fun actually, is that if the Library of Congress has made territorial newspapers available online for any state. So if you're a genealogist, if you're interested about the Old West, go to one word, chroniclingamerica.loc.gov, libraryofcongress.gov, chroniclingamerica.loc.gov. If you go there, there's a search engine and you can search by state, by town. And I find it fascinating to just read the local newspapers. Because they were small newspapers, they reported on everything. Who came to town, who's going off on vacation, how many pigs did Farmer Jones have? I mean, really everything. And you find out so much information about life by just reading the local newspapers. They're very different back then than newspapers are now. But that's a very fun place to start to get an idea of what the Old West was really like. They had baseball teams, they had football teams, right, in the Old West, and we often don't see that. They had ice cream socials and all these kinds of things. So that's what I would recommend.
Well, Dr. Pagán, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to share your work with us. Thank y'all in the audience for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.